Well, good morning ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Pike tutorial number 4. Today you join me at Badshot Lead Big Pond, run by Farnham Angling Society. Now this is not one of my regular pike fishing lakes, but I've been told by my brother that this area that I'm fishing in, the first few pegs on the railway bank, has been doing a few pike into double figures, so I thought it's right near my home. Nice and sunny morning. It was frosty when I first got here. Not ideal, not really a pike day or a day that I would choose to come out, but if it's not sunny and frosty, it's chucking it down with rain and I can't do videos there. So today I'm going to run through ways to enhance your baits, colouring baits, oiling up baits, pre-baiting, etc. Things like that, which a lot of us don't do, but we do it for other species, so why shouldn't we be doing it for pike? So yeah, it's just a few ways to get you more bites, give you a bit more confidence really when you go out, and hopefully put a few more pike in your net. Well, although I've only got a couple of hours, it would be rude not to cast a couple of baits out. Obviously, all the time you've got a bait in the water, you've got a chance. So how did I approach this swim when I first got here? Obviously, I got some information that the pike in this lake can be in this corner. And I've just looked at the swim. It's not one that I would really fish for if I've ever fished it. I suppose if you've got a brisk northeasterly pushing in here, you probably would do. But I was told there was pike here. I've come here. I've got 2 rods. What I've done is I've actually walked my rods out. I haven't used marker sticks because I don't have to be pinpoint accuracy today. But what I did was I walked both rods out 30 yards. I don't want the baits in the margins too close. I want them so if there is pike in the margins, they can detect my bait a little bit further out. So I've gone 30 yards, both rods, one towards some silver birches and one to a guy carp fishing, I assume, slightly to the left. And what I did was I just walked up, clipped up like I would for any other species. I've got an oiled up sardine on one rod. I've got the head broken off on that, again to leak all that oil slowly as it defrosts, and I've got another sardine again with the head broken off that has been dyed bright red, and I thought it was only right that I should be using the sort of baits that I'm going to be talking about. So both of those rods went out, both at 30 yards, and what I wanted to do was to actually create an area of feeding round there. So I've got my spom rod with me today. Again, I've walked up the bank, I've clipped up to 30 yards, and what I've done over the last few sessions, as I've said, I take all my offcuts home, cut them up into little pieces, and I've put 2 spom loads of cut up fish right over my 2 dead baits. It's something that I will do if I was here for the whole day. I'd probably put 1 more out every hour. And also refresh those baits every couple of hours as well. When you do this, the birds love it. The coots can be a real problem. Grebes, one's going down now. I think that probably did have a go at my dead bait. It's got a little bit of the pre-bait or the kind of cut fish I'm putting out there. I don't mind that because that attracts all that movement. Might just get a pike inquisitive coming in and saying what's going on here, gets all that oil and that scent into the water, and if anything, you know, I think they're probably doing you a favour as long as they're not picking up your bigger dead bait. So that's how I approach this swim, and I'd approach other swims in sort of a similar way if I was here for a few hours. Just look at the features. I've got some rushes out here that's quite a nice feature. Might put a bait out there later in the day, but if I was here all day, but I'm not. I'm only here for a couple of hours. So I've got the rods out. You never know, they might go off, probably won't. And you know, I might just land a nice pike for the camera. Okay, let's start on the first subject for today, and that is dye-in baits, different colours. And yes, I have done it. I've caught plenty of pike on red sardines. Easy to actually dye these yourself, as long as you buy the dye from the tackle shop. This one's the Pike Pro orange, red and yellow you can get. I'm sure there's other colours. And all I do when I get home, I go with my sardines that I've bought, let's say from Morrison's, is I get 4 or 5 sardines, make sure they're all intact, spray some dye into the bag, put 4 or 5 sardines in, depending on the size, give them a good shake up, and then they go into the freezer in my pike tray for when I go out next. And obviously you've got the orange ones and the yellow ones, and today I have actually got a red sardine out. So does dye-in baits catch you more pike? I wouldn't like to say yes it does or no it doesn't, but let's just talk about a couple of instances. I know a pike angler that fishes at Frensham Great Pond, and his hands are bright red, and the reason they're bright red is he dyes all his baits bright red, and that's because once, sometime in the past he might have been experimenting, he might have cast out a sardine that he dyed red, off it went, he might have caught a big pike, and that's his confidence. He has the confidence for ever and a day to cast out a red sardine, and confidence in fishing is everything really. If you're confident that what you're doing is correct, then you can't go far wrong. What I would say with dye-in baits is I don't think it is detrimental to a bait, especially if your baits are fresh. So as long as your dead baits, whether they're straight out of the blast frozen packs you buy at the tackle shop or the Morrison's, as long as they're super fresh, then does dye-in, is it going to make any difference to you catching more pike? Probably not, but it will give you a lot more confidence. I also remember talking to a good friend of mine who was fishing a really pressured water, and he just couldn't get bites, and then all of a sudden he cast out a trout that was dyed orange, got a bite, and that's all he could get bites on. So I think on a pressured water it might make a difference, because those pressured pike might have been used to picking up silver baits and thought, I've got to be a bit careful. So there, a dyed bait might work. But for the general club angler, it really is down to what, the confidence it's creating in your brain. And if you're confident casting a red, yellow or an orange bait out, then so be it. And if a pike comes along, good, you're going to have that confidence to do it forever and a day. Okay, let's talk about oiling baits up. The most important thing about when you think, I'm going to start oiling baits up, is that you make sure that you're using winterized oil, something that disperses into the water a lot more than an oil that you might take off the shelf of a tackle shop, put it into your bait and it just goes solid, because that might be made more for glugging pellets for catfish or something. So when you're actually going to buy some oil, make sure you've got winterized on it, or the tackle shop knows what they're talking about and are selling you the right stuff. Just don't go buying an oil that you don't know anything about and start pumping it into a fish, because that could have an adverse effect. It's not something I do a lot, because as I said earlier, the most important thing for me about pike fishing is knowing that my baits are cast out fresh. But I can remember a guy fishing a large pit for a known fish. It was a fish over 30 pound. He was finishing work, getting to the lake an hour before it got dark, and probably having to leave an hour in the morning, fish an hour into light. So he had those 2 good spells either end of the day. And what he was doing was getting a herring, pumping it with oil, sending it out on a bait boat with some 3 bits of cut fish round, and leaving that. And he would be doing that a few times a week, fishing for a specific fish, which he caught in the end. And he said, when you're going to get a bite, because that particular lake had sort of street lights and lights flashing across the water, and it was a big pit, so it was often ripply. And he said you'd be looking out there having a cup of tea, and all of a sudden a big flat spot would appear as a pike has picked up the bait, and that oil has come up to the surface, and he knew when he was going to get a bite. And as I said, what he was doing was getting a herring, pumping it up when it was defrosted from the supermarket, let's say, or one that he'd bought from a tackle shop, pumped it up with the right oil, put it in a bait boat, probably pierced the actual flesh with a baiting needle, sent it out there, dropped it, and that dead bait, or his 2 dead baits, were there for the whole night. And he was fishing for a big fish, and that slow leak off would attract those fish to that area. So I can fully understand why he was doing that. I can also see a reason that, in the day and age when money is tighter for everybody, you can go to a tackle shop, and I know Bait Box used to produce big roach. You used to get 2 in a packet, and I'm not joking, they were probably about 7-8 ounces, these roach. And let's say you've cast one of those out and it's been out there for a few hours, not too long, and at the end of the day you've wound it in and you've looked at it, you haven't cut the head off, you haven't pierced it, and it looks fine, but you're thinking, that fish has cost me £2.50, it's good to go again. But whilst it's been out in the lake, it's obviously lost a little bit of its natural kind of attractiveness. So I could see an angler taking that home, pumping it with a good winterized oil, and then actually freezing it down and then using it in an instance where you get to the lake, you want to put a big bait out at distance, and you're going to leave that bait all day. So 2 ways of oiling baits up again. Does it catch you more pike? I'm not too sure. Does it give the angler a lot more confidence that he's doing it right and he's doing everything he can, and give him confidence? Yeah, I can understand an angler doing it. So whether you want to oil baits up or dyed baits up, it's really down to you. Just make sure your baits are fresh, and I don't think you can go far wrong. Okay, let's just talk about the 3 ways I bait up when I get to a lake. Firstly, something I hardly ever use, but most anglers, or a lot of anglers nowadays, have got one of these, and that's a bait boat. Now, if I was fishing somewhere like Frensham Great Pond, fishing at, say, 60, 70 or more yards, and that's where the pike were, then this would become an absolute, definite piece of equipment to get your bait out there. Put your sardine, a load of bits of fish cut up, and out it goes to a mark, drop it, and that's going to be left there. So, these are very, very popular nowadays. I use them now and again for sending out a dead bait at distance. If I'm fishing at distance, as I said before, I'd be fishing braid as well. So yeah, if you know your pike are at distance and you can't get there, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to get one of these. And then moving on, as you saw earlier, the spom. We do it when we go tench fishing, carp fishing. For every species we fish for, we put some bait in there, something to get those fish feeding. All right, there's a lot more carp and catfish in this lake than pike, but that just means you just got to tone it down a little bit. But why not? Just casting a sardine out here or there, you're relying on that sardine or that pike to sense that sardine to leak off. But you can actually improve your catch rate by just spomming out a little bit of cut up fish that I take home after every session, cut it up, put it in an ice cream container, and it's good to go. It's not going to do any harm. All that, all the juice in there and everything, absolutely fantastic to get those pike sensing all those, that scent in the water, and then homing in, and you've got that one bigger bait there, like the kind of, icing on the cake there for that pike to pick up. So as you saw today, quite often use one of these just to top it up here and, every kind of hour or two throughout the day, just like I would if I was fishing the worm kebab for tench. And then another little device here is what we call the bait bomber. Now, before I discuss these, if you're going to use one of these, and I use these on the river, is to use them with an up trace, because there's so much goodness in there and taste that quite often you'll find pike will pick that up. I mean, if I was a pike, I'd be picking up a sardine, not the feeder, but I would just say, just be edge on the side of caution, fish an up trace just in case a pike does pick that up, because you don't want to be leaving your sardine with your hooks in a river for a pike to have a go at that and then pick that up. And all it is like a swim feeder. You've got weights in there, so if you're casting a little bit further, you put a couple of extra weights in. If you're fishing on the river and there's extra flow, you just put a bit more weight in there. And what you can do there, and it's not a very nice sort of job, but you can put loads and loads and cram it in there of fish, pieces, guts, heads, all cut up. And you can just imagine that's going to leak off loads and loads of scent down the river, dragging those pike upstream to that bigger bait, your dead bait. And the other thing is they also come with foam, and all you can do is just either soak it in all those natural fish guts, and again that just pushes into that swim feeder, that bait bomber, or you can get some of your winterized oil and you can soak that. So again, just imagine putting that out. It's going to, you know, create so much attraction around your hook bait that it cannot be doing you any harm. So the 3 ways that I attract pike to my swim or get my bait out into the lake is using a bait boat with some freebies around, using a spom, clipping up, dropping that all around my hook bait and the bait bomber. If you haven't got these, get a couple, but remember to use an up trace with these. Okay, a subject that a lot of pike anglers ask me is, does pre-baiting work, or is it just a lot of effort for little rewards? Now, I can only talk from my own experience, and we're going back about, I don't know, seven years maybe, when I fished Frensham Great Pond. And one day I just went down there in the morning, cast out a couple of sardines, probably spommed a little bit of chop over the top and caught a couple of doubles. Went back a few days later, caught another double, and I thought, there's numbers of fish in this swim. So what I decided to do was to go back, and I was going down at dusk, and the reason I was going at dusk is the coots there, because it's a shallow lake, can be a nightmare. You put any freebies out there, turn your back, and the coots are going down, picking up your bits of bait, taking them in the reeds and eating them. So I thought, if I put the bait in at night time, and because there's other times you'll be able to put it in the daytime maybe, or in the morning, because it's going to be deeper and get left alone. But because it was shallow, I thought I'm going to have to do this at dusk. You do run the risk of turning those pike into nocturnal feeders, but I thought in general pike are not very active at night time. They're going to wake up just before it gets light, go on a feed in sort of few hours, and that bait is going to be sat in that water. So I decided to bait about 40 yards out and under the rod tip, and it was unbelievable. I was getting sort of 7 doubles, I think was the best I did in a few hours in the morning, up to 16 pound. That fish we had, the second time we caught it, we assumed that was the biggest fish in the swim. We were getting other repeats because at Frensham they've got big yellow marks on, and we decided there's not anything bigger than 16, let's leave them alone, move on. And it was just absolutely fantastic. Every time I went, there was a time when even there was loads of ice on the lake, we still caught pike. So about 3 years ago, I just assumed those pike were going to be in the same area, headed back, baited up, put in half a dozen sessions, and I don't think I caught a pike. I might have had one little jacks. The coots were coming down, picking your baits up. That bait was still there when I got there, but and it just didn't work. So in my experience, if you're going to pre-bait, make sure you've got pike in your swim. It's a swim or an area those pike are happy being in, they feed in, they get caught from, and then by pre-baiting you are going to increase your catch rates. That a couple of years ago when I went back to Frensham, I actually had a heron coming down and taking bait out of my hand. So if I can educate a heron, which is normally a really timid bird, to come right up to me and take sardines out my hand, you can certainly educate pike. But make sure before you do so that you know you're baiting up in an area that contain pike, that fish get caught off, or you're going to waste a lot of time for nothing. And a couple of years ago again, I started pre-baiting a lake close to my home. About 30 years ago, I knew that lake quite well. It did fish to over 30 pound. I started baiting up in an area those pike came out of, did a lot of time, a couple of hours for about 10 sessions in the morning. I never had a run, and then I realised when I spoke to the guy that put me on the lake that all the pike that were being caught were right down the other end. I was running out of time. March the 14th was coming. I went down for 2 sessions and I caught a little jack both times. So it just goes to show that if, you know, make sure you've got pike and you know pike are in the area before you start going into a pre-baiting campaign. Well, there you have it, the end of another pike tutorial. Hope you enjoy this one and get a few tips on there, and you know, there's no harm in colouring your baits, oiling them up, whatever gives you confidence is absolutely superb, you know. I did actually miss a run this morning. I'm using single hooks for the first time, big singles hooked in the towel. Gave it a little bit longer than I'd like, but I always promote to strike immediately, and when you're using single hooks, I think that can be quite dangerous actually with pike fishing, because if you go and you start missing bites, you tend to leave it longer, and then that's when the trouble happens. So it is something I might cover next year, the use of circle hooks, single hooks, and try and, you know, work it out so when I do get a bite, I've got a setup where I can strike immediately and hook those fish. So as you can see, the Audi's back amazingly, 2 days short of 6 months it was. Didn't even come back washed or cleaned. Can you believe that? Audi Harwood's down in Portsmouth, had it for 6 months, didn't even wash it. So if you've got an Audi and you want to put it into a dealership, don't go down there, give it to somewhere like the one in Farnborough or maybe the one in Guildford, because they've treated me a lot better. But yeah, I've sorted a little bit of compensation out with them. As I said, 2 days short of 6 months I was without a car. So now back up and running, hopefully get the boat in there. Maybe the last week of the season might get and do some predator fishing for the Zeds on the Thames. But at the moment I think that's going to be my last tutorial pike this year. It's covered a lot of the basics, just really aimed at the club angler to go out there, those anglers just starting, or the beginners to have confidence going and casting a bait out, handling. And hopefully next year when kind of September comes, I'll pre-promote those so you can do a refresher and hopefully do a lot more sessions where I'm actually out on the bank and actually catching some fish, because that's been a little bit difficult to do this year. So anyway, thanks for watching. Make comments, please subscribe and give us the thumbs up, and I'll see you for another species, hopefully you know, in better fishing conditions, but spring might be in the air.